everyone, and welcome to a very special episode for Industrial Visionaries, the podcast. Today I'm talking to someone I know very well, and it's a partner of Senovo, a board member of FlowFuse now, Markus Grundmann. Thanks for joining, and great to have you on board with the company and on the show.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for letting me invest.
Yeah, really our pleasure. It's very interesting to see how investors work and what makes them invest in a company. Can you share a bit with the audience on how you make an investment decision in a company like FlowFuse?
Absolutely. So any investment that a VC considers usually needs to have potential to become a global category leader. That means that you have a systemic problem and customer cohort or industry, and that this problem is something that needs to be solved urgently. It typically or ideally helps to generate additional revenues or cut costs. And we've been following the digitalization of the industrial space for quite a while. We've been actively investing, for example, with an investment in a company called HiveQ. And what I noticed is that almost all of the customers that HiveQ has run some form of Node-RED deployment. Okay. So it's a really prevalent technology stack, which is really important. But the Node-RED ecosystem with all the benefits that it has was really lacking something that we call the typical enterprise feature. So it's about audit logs, access rights, versioning, multi-platform deployments. And when I learned that you and the original creator, Nick of Node-RED, were starting running a new company called FlowFuse, I was really, really intrigued to find out like what your plans are, what the status is, and if we could play a role in that journey.
Got it. And so if you look at then this thesis, digitalization, it's very manufacturing focused. Mm-hmm. You invest much broader than just in manufacturing SaaS companies.
Yes.
Do you feel like there is a big difference between like quote unquote ordinary companies and manufacturing SaaS customers?
Unfortunately, yes. From my perspective, I think there was like a big, let's call it like first wave, about like 5, 6, 7 years ago, mostly surrounding the topic like Industry 4.0. Unfortunately, this, like got quite some attention, quite some investments, but it didn't really generate the corresponding amount of like big and significant companies. And I think one of the reasons for this is that a lot of the solutions there, they weren't thought as software companies, but they were thought as, let's say, like incremental feature development. And what I see now, what's happening through stuff like the MQTT initiative and through Node-RED is that we see, I call it software native companies taking over the infrastructure stack. And what that means is if you think about like what brought the emergence of the entire software industry to begin with, it was companies like Linux or the Unix companies, the Linux movement, the Windows movement, which generated operating systems and provided everybody access to run innovative application company or innovative applications on top of these, it's called infrastructure or operating system layers. And what happens now with MQTT and Node-RED is that we see open standards and open platforms emerging, and that should generate it's like the ecosystem effect, which pulls in like more and more interfaces, applications, use cases, and through that, and just drives a very different deployment that's like speed and benefit.
And so apparently, the first wave of Industry 4.0 or digitalization was made ultimately by hardware companies. And now it seems to be more software first, and the ROI is in the software and not in selling hardware and more devices.
Yes. Or you could say, if I always like to look at analogies in the past of stuff that has worked or has not worked, right? Mm-hmm. It's kind of like the Blackberries and the Nokias versus like the iPhone, right?
Okay. No pressure for us to do better than Apple. Sure. Yeah, we'll work at it. So the way we work is obviously with a whole team. Were there things about the team that you saw were very interesting? And what was the first thing you noticed about the team? And then gave you the confidence that we were the category leader of the future?
Nick and you are both software people at heart. The critical part is that you live and you breathe the culture, the strategy, the principles of software companies. And so it comes back to, what we've been discussing. As a software person, you always try to solve a certain problem in the stack, basically. Then you create APIs for other people to integrate. And through those integrations, basically, the entire stack gains and wins. It's a form of network effect, essentially, right? And what I have observed with these other teams who come from, like hardware or machine manufacturers or something like this, is it was way more this like walled garden, small access or small incremental thinking. And if you really wanted to create a big company, and if you really want to create something that changes an industry, like we're seeing with the digitalization in the industrial tech space, then you also need a paradigm shift in the way that you approach this, and working in the software and in an ecosystem way. And so for us, this was the defining difference, that we're investing in a software company run and originated by software people with a strategy of these companies.
And so to show how software I am, like we were stuck in a local maximum and there was a random jump needed out of this hardware local maximum into a new way of iterating and improving the stack of both manufacturing, but also other IoT use cases. Got it. Okay. So then what I did notice is that like it does seem to move slower in manufacturing. First, like the sales cycle. In my background, selling software to software companies, it was quite a bit faster than sadly FlowFuse can sell software. But then the funding environment for me didn't really feel like it was very different. And also the market that is approachable, I feel like is much bigger than I actually anticipated at the beginning. Do you feel like those balance each other out? Is that a correct deduction from my side?
I mean, you're the guy who goes out and raises the fund. I think, ultimately, like your impression is probably the more relevant one. My impression is on the fund side is that I see more hesitancy and a lack to invest in the industrial software space. Mm-hmm. And that is because at the end of the day, it's unfortunate, but as a VC, you don't have a lot of data points. And so you take the few data points that you have and you apply pattern matching. That leads to herd mentality and or in a positive spin, success breeds success, basically. So if somebody or a team was successful in the field of HR software, they are way more likely to make another adjacent investment in HR software or in like a adjacent field to HR software. So because there was a lack of big exits in the Industry 4.0 field, I think comparably few investors became successful through investments in those fields. And that then in turn makes it a bit, let's say, like harder, or you have to be extra convincing in order to have an equal field of opportunity. Now, the question is now that I think of a different one is that good or bad for both of us, right? Yeah. So for me, obviously, I'm buying essentially shares in a company, and if that field is less competitive, basically, that's a advantageous position for me, right? For you as a founder, however, it's exactly the same. You have a pretty big problem if there's 1,000 founders going with venture dollars, basically after the same market and the same problem. If that market is way more selective in terms of the teams and the technologies and the companies that get backed, basically, it's comparably, let's say, like easier to really convince with quality, with a good ROI and with that kind of stuff. And it's not just the marketing speed.
And so if there's a couple of companies in the next 5 years that have huge exits to IPO, so being publicly traded, that does give a lot of people a way to reason about early stage investments. So it took them X years to get there. And so if I invest this amount of dollars, then it needs to be such an exit. So it's worth the money.
Exactly. And so the way that we see it is you basically have three types of, let's say, like mega markets in the VC space, right? The one is the old traditional horizontal software because you can generally just sell to everyone under the sun. The second one is where we're seeing a lot of hype right now is the agentic systems. And what the agentic AI solutions do is essentially automating and taking over the services sector. Now, if you look at what companies do to generate money and revenues, they either provide a service or they manufacture something that somebody buys, right? And so this field, this third field, is completely underserved, I think, by innovative vendors and by people willing to invest. And that, on the flip side, makes it an even much more attractive market to be active. Or as many people like to say, right, ideally as a founder, as an early stage investor, you skate where the puck is gonna be, not where it was, like the last year or 5 years ago.
Also sounds fairly stressful to predict where the puck is gonna be.
Yeah, but that's at the end of the day what we get paid for, right?
Yeah, fair enough. Rather you than me at this stage, maybe someday in the future. So continuing on more like trends, and because that's ultimately, if you know where the puck is going to be 5 years, so you're following trends. In terms of digitalization and manufacturing, where do you think like the next 5 years and 10 years are going to be? Because we are making the transition from being, well, we have an augmentation of hardware first companies with software first companies. It feels like AI still falls within like the software first companies area. Is there like a third area that's emerging, or is this the next 5 to 10 years by your estimation?
Well, I do think that industrial tech area is going to be that third and equally important field at the end of the day, right? Like, I mean, value creation goes beyond what somebody does with his hands on a keyboard, right? Like most of the real value creation on our planet is like people producing cars or producing cell phones or running a pump installation or something like this. And what they have in terms of, like systems of intelligence or systems of actions or something is essentially the same since the 1980s with some, like small incremental improvement. And I just completely refuse to accept that this is, let's say, like the pinnacle of technology, and that in 2030, 2035, 2040 or something like this, we are still, like going to see the same thing. I did a reference call with a customer that was in connection with a different investment who ran the largest pump installation in Europe. I don't know, it was thousands of kilometers of pipeline, basically. And he said if he wants to see if there is maintenance needed or something is wrong, they have to go physically on site. And then it's usually you smell and you feel the pump or the pipeline if it's warm. And if that is warm, then it's a strong indication that you want to shut that segment down and undergo maintenance. I mean, that cannot be it, right? And the same, so in the reference call, he said the same thing. And he said kind of like, I go in after work, I sit into my BMW, and it will tell me like, oh, low air pressure, front right tire, you can still drive, but like at the next a gas station or something, why don't you follow it up or something like this? And so we have a device which costs 50K basically, which has more intelligence than the biggest pump network in all of Europe. And I mean, that's just ridiculous at the end of the day, in an obvious field, I think, where we could do much better overall.
I also felt, as I was new to this whole industry, they would have been further along than they actually were when I met people and walked their factory floor. There's so many projects where just basic data is missing, and these are factory floors. Like if it's a pumping installation and it's hundreds of miles of pipeline, like there can be tricks on like how did you get the data there? But these are hardwired manufacturing sites where the data is already digital. It just doesn't make its way into the hands of who wants to make an improvement and understand if this improvement is going to actually move the needle. Yeah, I'm sorry I'm answering my own question. But my take here is generally like we're not as far as we really want to be in the physical space, and integrating physical reality with the digital realm is still a lot of work to be done by the industry. Markus, I see we're already at time. We try to keep the episodes about 15 minutes, so I'm sorry for cutting us short a bit, but I definitely want to thank you for the time and the insights you've shared with us today. Before we do wrap, if I want to follow along with what you're doing, where you're investing next, where can we follow along?
You can go to our website, www.senovo.vc. You can look us up on LinkedIn. My name is Markus Grundmann. Just write me a message on LinkedIn, send me an email, markus@senovo.vc.
Yeah. All right, will do. Thanks a lot. And thanks again for joining. Had a lot of fun, and thanks for sharing this with the audience. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you so much. Take care.